The world watched and held its breath. In a move that sent shockwaves across the globe, China publicly declared its support for Russia. This wasn't a quiet nod, it was a loud, clear statement the world couldn't ignore. The war in Ukraine, already brutal, had just entered a much darker phase. Suddenly this was no longer just Russia versus Ukraine, it was a global power struggle. Leaders in Washington, Brussels, and London were stunned. They had hoped China would stay neutral. But China chose a side, and it chose Russia. This decision didn't just add fuel to the fire, it fundamentally changed the conflict. A new axis of power emerged, openly challenging the West. The question on everyone's mind: why would China risk so much for a war so far from its borders? The answer: politics, power, and long-term strategy. China saw an opportunity to weaken its main rival, the United States, and reshape the global order. By backing Russia, China was making a calculated move in a high-stakes global chess game. The future of international relations and the stability of the world now hung in the balance. For Ukraine, this news was devastating. They were already fighting for survival against a larger enemy. Now that enemy had a superpower in its corner. The hope for a quick end to the war faded. The prospect of a long, grinding conflict became a terrifying reality. This alliance meant more weapons, more money, and more political cover for Russia. It was a dark turn in an already dark story. China's move could redefine the 21st century. The world's balance of power was shifting before our eyes. The stakes had never been higher. The world was watching and the consequences would be felt everywhere. The war in Ukraine was no longer just about territory. It was about the future of the global order. And the world held its breath. What pushed this conflict to a new level? It might have started with a phone call, a call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Kremlin sources revealed chilling details. Putin, emboldened by shifting American politics, laid out his true ambitions. He didn't just want parts of Ukraine, he wanted all of it. This was a major escalation. Publicly, Russia spoke of denazification. Privately, the goal was total conquest. Putin believed Ukraine had no right to exist as a sovereign nation. This phone call stripped away propaganda and revealed raw imperial ambition. Putin wasn't negotiating. He was declaring his intent to erase a country from the map. The timing was critical. The US was heading into a contentious election cycle, and political divisions ran deep. Putin saw a divided America as a distracted America, less willing to lead a strong coalition. He gambled that Western resolve would crumble, and support for Ukraine would dry up. The conversation with Trump seemed to confirm his belief that he could achieve his ultimate goal. This revelation sent a clear signal to Beijing. China was watching, analyzing every move. When Putin declared his intention to take all of Ukraine, China saw the conflict differently. This wasn't going to be a quick war, it would be a long, drawn-out struggle. A struggle that would consume the attention and resources of the United States and its allies. For China, a distracted West was an opportunity. It was a golden chance to advance its own agenda on the world stage. The phone call changed everything, not just for Ukraine but for the entire global order. China was ready to make its move. The world's balance was shifting and the stakes had never been higher. Then came the official statement that made the world sit up and take notice. A high-ranking Chinese official declared, "We cannot allow Russia to lose." This wasn't a call for peace, it was a promise to prop up Russia's war effort. China was drawing a line in the sand. A Russian defeat would leave China isolated, the sole challenger to the US-led order. A strong Russia, even bogged down in war, serves as China's crucial partner and buffer. This declaration was a calculated message to Washington. Your actions against Russia will have consequences. China was warning the West not to push too hard or provide Ukraine with the weapons needed for victory. Instead, China used its economic and political leverage to influence the war's outcome. The goal? Create a stalemate where Russia doesn't lose, but doesn't win either. This balance serves China's interests best. It keeps the conflict going and the West distracted. China began to act on its promise. It provided Russia with economic lifelines, buying huge amounts of oil and gas. It supplied dual-use technologies, drones, microchips, vital for Russia's military. This subtle support kept Russia's war machine running. China ensured Russia wouldn't collapse under Western sanctions. It was a masterclass in indirect intervention. China's support was quiet but effective. The world saw a new kind of alliance, one built on shared interests, not just friendship. The message was clear. China would not let Russia fall. The war's outcome was no longer just about Ukraine. It was about the future of global power. China was now a key player in the conflict. The stakes had grown even higher. The world was watching, and the consequences would be profound. The balance of power was shifting, one calculated move at a time. Here's the crucial point. China doesn't want Russia to win the war outright. A swift Russian victory would create instability and draw global attention to China as Russia's enabler. It would accelerate the formation of a strong anti-China coalition. That's the last thing Beijing wants. China prefers to operate in the shadows, building power quietly. So what is China's true aim? Not victory, not defeat, but a long, grinding, distracting war. A forever war in Ukraine is the perfect scenario for Beijing. It bleeds Russia, making it more dependent on China. It forces the US and Europe to spend billions and immense political energy supporting Ukraine. It keeps the West's eyes fixed on Eastern Europe, while China pursues its ambitions elsewhere. This strategy allows China to call for peace and dialogue, all while quietly fueling the conflict. It can position itself as a potential mediator, gaining international prestige. Meanwhile, the war weakens both Russia and the West. It drains resources, frays alliances, and creates a power vacuum China is ready to fill. For China, the war in Ukraine is not a crisis, it's a strategic opportunity. The longer the war drags on, the more China stands to gain. It's a brilliant, if cynical, strategy. The world's attention is fixed on Ukraine, but China is playing a much bigger game. The war is a tool for reshaping the global order, and China is pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The forever war is China's perfect scenario. While the world focuses on Ukraine, China is quietly reaping the benefits. First, trade. With Russia cut off from the West, China has become its economic lifeline. Chinese goods flood into Russia, while China buys Russian energy at a steep discount. Cheaper oil and gas fuel China's economy, giving it a competitive edge. Second, global distraction. The US is pouring resources into Ukraine, leaving less focus on China's moves in Asia, Africa, and beyond. The war is the perfect smokescreen for China's ambitions. Third, China is testing the West's resolve, watching how long support for Ukraine lasts, and how much pain the West will endure. The answers provide China with a playbook for its own future moves, especially regarding Taiwan. Supporting Russia allows China to project strength and offer an alternative to the US-led order. It enhances China's image as a leader of the global South and a champion of a multipolar world. By standing with Russia, China signals the end of unipolar American dominance. A new era is dawning, and China plans to be at its center. Without firing a shot, China is emerging as one of the biggest winners of this tragic war. The world is distracted, but China is advancing. The war in Ukraine is a golden opportunity for Beijing. The global order is shifting, and China is quietly taking the lead. The world may not see it yet, but China is winning this war in its own way. Just as Ukraine began to push back, something shifted in Washington. The flow of weapons and ammunition slowed to a trickle. Political infighting and funding debates led to a critical pause in US military aid. Vital supplies were held up for weeks, then months. On the battlefield, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Ukrainian soldiers rationed ammunition, firing 1 shell for every 10 from the Russians. This pause was a gift to Russia, exactly what Putin had hoped for. The Russian army regrouped, rearmed, and reinforced its positions. The momentum Ukraine had built was lost. The message to Moscow: Western support is not guaranteed. For Ukraine's soldiers, it was a moment of deep despair. They watched as Russian forces advanced again, retaking towns and villages. The pause in US aid didn't just cost Ukraine territory, it cost lives. It forced impossible choices: trade land for the lives of their soldiers. For China, this was a major victory. It proved that democratic nations are unreliable partners, and internal politics can disrupt foreign policy. The pause damaged America's credibility and played directly into China's hands. As US aid faltered, Russia unleashed a terrifying new phased drone swarms. Taking advantage of Ukraine's weakened air defenses, Russia launched massive waves of attack drones. Many were built with components sourced from China. Night after night, these drones targeted power plants, water supplies, and apartment buildings. The goal: terrorize civilians and break Ukraine's will to fight. The scale was unprecedented. Hundreds launched in a single night, overwhelming defenses. Chinese companies became the primary source for the components needed to build these drones. Beijing denied direct involvement but did little to stop the flow of dual-use technology. China maintained plausible deniability while fueling Russia's air war. For China, this was a live-fire laboratory, studying how drone swarms performed against Western defenses. The lessons learned are now shaping China's own military strategy, especially for a possible conflict over Taiwan. The war in Ukraine is providing China with priceless data for the future of warfare. Facing shortages and overwhelming attacks, Ukraine changed tactics. They began targeting high-ranking Russian commanders with precision strikes. The goal: sow chaos, disrupt command, and lower morale within the Russian military. Each successful strike was a psychological blow, proving no one was safe. It was also a message to the Kremlin: Ukraine could strike back. This asymmetric strategy raised the personal cost of war for Russia's elite. For China, it was another lesson, highlighting the vulnerabilities of traditional military structures. The war became a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides adapting rapidly. China was watching, learning, and preparing for its own future conflicts. Why does China prefer this forever war? It's about its grand vision for the future. A long war in Ukraine keeps the West preoccupied, giving China time to consolidate power and expand influence. Both Russia and the West are weakened, leaving China poised to emerge as the global leader. But this strategy is risky. Escalation could spiral out of control, harming China too. Beijing is walking a fine line, keeping the fire burning but not letting it rage out of control. The world faces unsettling questions. Can Ukraine survive? Will the Western alliance hold? Is this the beginning of a new global order shaped by US-China rivalry? The war in Ukraine is now a battle for the future. The outcome is anything but certain. The stakes are global, and the world is still holding its breath.